Picture classic pirate scene. Storm rages across Caribbean. Lightning splits black sky, and
That's being tossed around like child's toy in bathtub!
now imagine fearless pirate captain, completely unbothered by chaos, stretched out in his cabin snoring peacefully, while his ship battles for survival against fury of nature. Hollywood loves this image of pirates,
who are so tough, so experienced, that they can sleep through anything ocean throws at them.
But here's brutal reality that those romantic adventure films never show you. Real pirates didn't sleep through storms because they were fearless. They slept through storms because they had no choice completely, and failing to figure out how to rest during the worst weather imaginable meant dying of exhaustion, long before any enemy could kill them. Truth is that pirates developed sleeping techniques that were part survival skill, part desperate improvisation, and part pure stubbornness in face of conditions that would break most people's ability to rest entirely. Let's explore how pirates mastered the impossible art of sleeping through nature's most violent tantrums. Keep most modern people awake for weeks, when your wooden ship is being thrown around by waves size of buildings. When thunder crashes so loud it feels like cannon fire. When every plank in vessel is groaning like it's about to split apart. And dump everyone into black ocean, you don't sleep because you're brave. You sleep because your body and mind have been pushed beyond their limits. And rest becomes as essential as breathing, even when that rest has to happen in middle of what feels like end of the world completely. Ocean operates on its own schedule, completely indifferent to human needs for comfort, safety, or regular sleep patterns. And pirates learned this lesson hard way during their first major storms at sea. Tropical storms and hurricanes could appear with terrifying speed, transforming calm waters into churning nightmares in matter of hours. And these weather systems could last for days or even weeks, battering ships with relentless fury that testing every aspect of survival, including the desperate need to somehow find rest in conditions that seem designed to prevent any possibility of sleep. This is where pirates developed their legendary sleeping techniques, methods that would seem impossible to modern people, but were with relentless waves, howling winds, and driving rain that turned every surface slick and dangerous. Pirates couldn't pull over at roadside inn or dock at convenient harbor to wait out bad weather. They were trapped on their floating wooden boxes, forced to ride out whatever nature decided to throw at them, while trying to keep their ships from breaking apart and their crews from being swept overboard. Work of sailing through storm never stopped, requiring constant attention to sails, rigging, pumps, and steering.
With all hands needed on deck at various times to handle emergencies that could arise without warning.
Crew members had to work in shifts, with some men handling immediate storm duties while others tried to grab whatever rest they could, in preparation for their next turn battling elements. But exhaustion was just as deadly as storm itself. Pirates who were too tired to think clearly or react quickly were likely to make fatal mistakes, like losing their grip on rigging or failing to secure vital equipment during critical moments. When split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death for the entire crew. This deadly cycle of exhaustion and danger forced pirates to develop revolutionary sleeping techniques that allow grip on rigging, missing important commands, or falling asleep at crucial moments when their alertness could mean difference between survival and disaster. Challenge wasn't just staying awake when they needed to.
Work, but figuring out how to actually sleep when their bodies desperately needed rest, but environment
Seemed designed to make sleep impossible. Pirates discovered that hammocks weren't just comfortable sleeping arrangements, were ingenious pieces of survival equipment that could mean the difference between waking up rested and waking up with broken skull from being thrown across ship's interior. Traditional beds or sleeping mats would have been useless during storms, since they would slide around the deck or cabin with every wave, turning sleep into dangerous game of human pinball, where tired sailors could be slammed into walls.
Posts, or each other with bone-breaking force. Hammocks, however, were designed to work with ship's movement.
Rather than against it, suspended from strong points in the ship's frame and allowed to swing freely.
As vessel rolled and pitched through waves, properly hung hammock would cradle sleeping pirate and move, with ship's motion absorbing much of violent movement that would otherwise throw him around like rag. Doll. Pirates became experts at rigging their hammocks with just right amount of slack and positioning them in spots where they would have maximum freedom to swing without hitting obstacles or other.
Sleeping crew members. Irony was that, while hammocks kept pirates from being injured by ship's movement,
they also amplified sensation of being tossed around, since sleeping in hammock during storm meant experiencing
every roll, pitch, and yaw of ship in exaggerated form. Many pirates found that hammocks made
their seasickness worse, creating nauseating sensation of being rocked inside something that was already being rocked. But they learned to accept this discomfort as your price of avoiding more serious injuries that came. From trying to sleep on solid surfaces during rough weather, when storms became so violent that even properly rigged hammocks weren't enough to keep pirates safe during sleep, crews had to resort to more desperate measures that turned rest time into exercise in creative rope work and careful positioning. Pirates would tie themselves to sturdy parts of ship's structure using rope harnesses that kept them from being thrown around while still allowing enough movement to breathe comfortably and change positions. During sleep, these rope systems had to be carefully designed with knots that were strong enough to hold during violent ship movements, but not so tight that they would cut off circulation or strangle a sleeper if ropes shifted during the night. Some pirates preferred to wedge themselves between heavy objects like water barrels, cannonballs, or cargo crates, using weight and stability of these items to create small protected spaces where they could curl up and ride out storms. Challenge with. This approach was finding objects that were heavy enough to stay in place during rough weather, but positioned so that they wouldn't crush sleeping person if they shifted during particularly violent waves. Pirates developed techniques for bracing themselves, using combinations of ropes, wedges, and their own body weight,
creating human anchoring systems that kept them relatively stationary while allowing their ships to move freely
around them. These sleeping arrangements were uncomfortable and often dangerous. There are stories of pirates who
tied their knots too tight and nearly strangled themselves, or who positioned themselves poorly and woke
up bruised and battered from being pressed against hard surfaces all night. But they were better
than alternative of being thrown around ship like loose cargo during storm. Sensory assault of sleeping
through major storm at sea was unlike anything most people can imagine, combining every possible form of noise, wetness, and discomfort into experience that tested limits of human endurance. Thunder didn't just
rumble during ocean storms. It exploded like artillery fire, shaking entire ship and making sleep impossible
for anyone who wasn't already exhausted beyond their limits. Waves crashed against hull with sounds like
buildings collapsing, sending vibrations through every piece of wood in vessel, and creating constant drumbeat of
impacts that made quiet rest unthinkable. Rain didn't just fall during these storms. It attacked from every direction, driven by winds so strong that it could penetrate even smallest gaps in ship's construction, creating constant dripping that turned sleeping areas into damp, miserable caves where everything was wet and
Nothing ever dried out completely. Ships themselves added to cacophony, with every beam, plank, and joint.
Groaning and creaking as the vessel flexed and twisted through waves, creating sounds that made it seem
like ship was constantly on verge of breaking apart. But perhaps most disturbing aspect of Storm, sleeping was sharing space with ship's rat population, which seemed to thrive during rough weather and
would crawl over sleeping pirates with complete indifference to their discomfort. Pirates developed dark sense of
humor about their rodent roommates, joking that rats were better sailors than most of crews since.
They seemed to sleep soundly regardless of how violent Storm became, and some crews even used rats' behavior as weather indicator, noting that when rats became especially active and bold, it usually meant Storm was going to get worse before it got better. Pirates learned that secret too. Sleeping during storms wasn't about achieving comfort or quiet. It was about tricking their exhausted minds into shutting down despite conditions that seemed designed to keep every human instinct on high alert. They discovered that alcohol, consumed in carefully measured amounts, could help their bodies relax enough to fall asleep even when their rational minds were screaming that this was not safe time to be
unconscious. But too much rum would leave them dangerously impaired if they needed to wake up
quickly for emergency duties, so pirates had to find precise balance between relaxation and readiness that would allow rest without compromising safety. Some crews developed techniques for group sleeping that involved singing, sea shanties, or telling familiar stories in low voices, creating human soundtrack that was predictable and comforting enough to help tired minds focus on something other than chaos around them. Pirates learned to use prayer, meditation, or simple repetitive thoughts as mental anchors that could help them drift off despite sensory overload of storm conditions. Most experienced sailors developed almost supernatural ability to assess
ship's condition through sound and movement, learning to distinguish between normal storm stress and kinds of
changes that indicated real danger, which allowed them to sleep with one part of their consciousness, monitoring ship's status while rest of their mind got rest it desperately needed. This wasn't really
Sleep in your way most people understand it. It was more like controlled unconsciousness that could be.
Interrupted instantly if conditions changed from merely horrible to actually life-threatening.
Sleep as continuous, restful period became completely meaningless, replaced by pattern of micro-naps and stolen moments of rest that had to be grabbed whenever duties allowed and conditions briefly permitted. Pirates learned to function on fragments of sleep that might last anywhere from few minutes to hour, depending on what Storm and their responsibilities demanded of them. They developed ability to fall asleep almost instantly when given opportunity, since they never knew how long that opportunity would last before they'd be called back to deck duty or awakened by some new emergency. Some pirates became legendary for their ability to sleep while standing up, leaning against masts or rigging while remaining technically ready to spring into action if needed, though this technique was dangerous since falling asleep while
holding essential equipment could lead to accidents that endangered entire crew. Most skilled storm sleepers learned
to wake up gradually rather than all at once, emerging from their brief rest periods with
enough awareness to assess current situation before fully committing to being awake and active. This skill
was crucial because waking up disoriented during storm could be fatal. Pirates needed to know immediately whether they were waking up to handle routine duties or respond to life-threatening emergency. Stories spread
throughout pirate communities about men who could catnap for 10 or 15 minutes and wake up.
More refreshed than landlubbers who had slept for 8 hours in comfortable beds, though these same
men often paid price with chronic exhaustion and health problems that came from never getting truly restorative sleep for weeks or months at time. Ocean claimed many pirates who couldn't master delicate
Balance between getting enough rest to function and staying alert enough to survive, and pirate crews
were filled with cautionary tales about men who made fatal mistakes in their sleeping arrangements during storms. There were stories of exhausted sailors who forgot to tie themselves down properly and were found missing next morning, presumably swept overboard by waves while they slept, their bodies lost forever to hungry ocean that showed no mercy for even smallest mistakes. Other tales spoke of pirates who suffocated when their hammocks flipped during particularly violent ship movements, trapping them in canvas cocoons where they couldn't breathe, or who drowned when flooding in lower areas of ship caught them, while they were too deeply asleep to wake up and escape. Some crews lost men who positioned themselves poorly and were crushed by shifting cargo or equipment that broke loose during storm, turning their sleeping areas into death traps that claimed victims who were simply too tired to
think clearly about safety. Pirates learned to check on each other during storms, developing buddy systems,
where men would take turns ensuring that their sleeping shipmates were still breathing, still properly secured, and still positioned safely as conditions changed throughout night. These stories served as constant reminders that
sleep during storms was calculated risk that had to be balanced against certainty that exhaustion would
eventually kill anyone who couldn't find ways to rest. But they also highlighted incredible dangers that
pirates faced, even during their most vulnerable moments when they were simply trying to get enough rest to survive another day at sea. As we look back across centuries at these masters
of impossible sleep, we see different kind of courage than swashbuckling bravery that dominates pirate legends.
Ability to close your eyes and trust your life to rope knots and hammock rigging while your wooden world is being torn apart by forces beyond human control represents a profound form of faith, not necessarily religious faith, but faith in their own survival skills, in their shipmates' competence, and in their ability to wake up, ready to face whatever new challenges morning might bring. Pirates learned to treat storms not as enemies to be defeated, but as natural rhythms to be endured and adapted to, developing techniques that worked with ocean's power rather than fighting against. They discovered that survival often meant accepting conditions that seemed unacceptable, finding rest in chaos, and maintaining hope in situations that would drive most people to despair. Their ability to sleep through conditions that would terrify modern travelers wasn't sign of recklessness or ignorance. It was proof
of remarkable adaptability and almost supernatural determination to keep living no matter what world threw
at them. When those legendary pirates finally woke up from their storm-tossed sleep, they did so with confidence that comes from knowing you've survived another night that could have been your last.
And with resilience that comes from turning every challenge into just another part of adventure.
Storms may have shaken their ships and tested their courage, but they never shook fundamental pirate belief that any problem could be solved with enough creativity, stubbornness, and willingness to laugh at despair.